with the Washington Medical Commission, and I just hit my 35th anniversary with the commission. Thank you. So I guess that makes me kind of the unofficial historian. And I like medical regulation history. I think the history of this commission is fascinating. So I'm going to take you on a 145-year journey, historical journey of the commission. I'm or for a fourth. Yeah, I have. Goodness. Okay. I'm going to tell you how it began, how it's changed over 145 years, and how it hasn't changed. Some things have not changed. And I'm going to tell you some events and occurrences that happened during this 145 years that I've kind of lost to history. But I want to bring them back because a lot of them impact your work today. So I'm going to tell you about the guy who started it all. That's this guy, this roguish looking guy with the beard there, how he started it, why he started the commission. I'm going to tell you how Abraham Lincoln is connected to this commission. I'm going to talk to you about Prohibition and what the AMA did during Prohibition and how that relates to something you do today. And we're going to take a look at a hearing panel from the 1950s, those gentlemen up there, and the case that they had and the principle that came out of that case that you use today. And I'm going to tell you why in one summer day in 1988, the board went on strike. They actually went on strike. And along the way, I'm going to give you talk about people and cases that are colorful, interesting, and tell you about who you are. I think to really know who you are, you have to know where we came from. I'm going to tell you about the guy with the eye patch and what he did to lose his license. I'm going to tell you about the woman below him and why the governor asked her to leave the country. I'm going to tell you about a case involving a doctor that you will think of every time you take a bite of almond roca. So here's our timeline. We're going to begin in 1846 and go to the present day. I'm going to spend a lot of time at the beginning because I think the beginning is interesting. I'm going to go quickly through the 20th century, and then I'm going to slow down in the 1980s. And that's a time that I refer to as the Troubles. In a nod to Irish history, when they had sectarian violence in the late 60s through the 80s, we had a big conflict back then with our umbrella agency, the Department of Licensing, and then the Department of Health. And those conflicts that we had, those issues that arose then, are important to what we do today. They led to the structure that you enjoy today. So let's begin. Our story begins with this man. This is William Augustus Newell. He was a plastic surgeon in New Jersey. 1846, he decides to run for Congress as a member of the Whig Party, and he wins. And he goes to Congress, and he lives in a boarding home in Washington, D.C. And in that boarding home, he befriended another freshman representative from the state of Illinois by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And they become fast friends. They actually sit together in the House of Representatives. Dr. Newell serves 2 terms in Congress. He goes back to New Jersey, goes back into practice, and then in 1857, he becomes governor of New Jersey. So he's in the House of Representatives, then he's governor, serves 1 term as governor, goes back into practice, and then in 1865, he decides, I'm going to go back to Congress. He gets elected, he goes back to Congress, and this time his friend Abe is sitting in the White House. And President Lincoln knows he's a doctor, he trusts him, so he asks him to take care of his family. So Dr. Newell becomes the White House physician. Wasn't an official position back then, but he was the White House physician. He is credited in one source of saving President Lincoln's son, Tad, that typhoid fever. Sadly, Tad died at age 18, as all of Lincoln's 4 children died young. Dr. Newell, according to one source, in that grainy photo of President Lincoln as he's just finished the Gettysburg Address, he's walking off the stage. That address, as you probably know, was so short that the photographer didn't have time to set up. Gets a picture of Lincoln leaving the stage. And according to one source, Dr. Newell is one of those people in the background. President Lincoln called Dr. Newell a true friend of the Union and every way a reliable gentleman. Mary Todd Lincoln called Dr. Newell a most estimable gentleman. In 1867, Dr. Newell says, I want to go back to Congress. He runs again. This time he loses. Then he runs for governor of the state of New Jersey. He's already been governor. He runs again, and he loses to a man by the name of George B. McClellan. And if you know your Civil War history, you know who George McClellan is, General George McClellan, who Lincoln fired. Dr. Newell had 1880. That's Dr. Newell. He's a little bit older now. And I just gave a very thumbnail sketch of what he did. He was actually very accomplished in politics and in medicine. But in 1880, he had a little blip in his trajectory. The New Jersey Medical Society charged him with unprofessional conduct. Now, it's the medical society, not the medical board. They didn't come into existence until 1894 in New Jersey, after us. But they charged him with unprofessional conduct. So you can see how old that term is. They used it back then. We still use it today. They're probably wondering, what did he do? Well, about to tell you, this is what he did. Consultation with A.C. Haynes, a regular eclectic, a Thomsonian practitioner. Be bad, huh? I'll tell you what that means. Back then, people who went to medical school, regular medical school, called themselves regulars. And they called anybody who practiced the healing arts who didn't go to medical school irregular. Eclectic back then was a person who practiced alternative medicine. And a Thomsonian practitioner is a follower of Samuel Thomson, who was an herbalist and botanist and is considered the father of alternative medicine. So, Dr. Newell, back then, the medical society could expel a person for hanging out with the wrong crowd. So that's what he did. The medical society referred this case to the local medical society, the Monmouth Medical Society, and Dr. Newell he denied the charges, demanded a full investigation, and this did not sit well with the medical society, and they censured him. So, no hearing, no due process, they censured him. But here's Dr. Newell. He's sitting at home. He's run for Congress and lost. He's run for governor and lost. He's been censured by the Monmouth Medical Society. He's at a low point in his life. Gets a letter in the mail. The letter is from the President of the United States, Rutherford Hayes. He opens up the letter, and the letter offers Dr. Newell the chance to become the 11th governor of the territory of Washington. So he sees this as a chance for redemption, and he says yes. Before he leaves, before he heads out west, he goes to Brooklyn. He gives a speech. And the speech is called The Wonders of Washington. And that speech was so inspiring that a group of New Yorkers, sources vary on the number of these people, how many went, but a group of New Yorkers decided to move out west with him. They settled in the Sherman Valley, just south of here. They call themselves the Newell Colony. Can you imagine how much pull he had to have these people move out west, call themselves the Newell Colony? How much charisma, or riz, as they say now, right? Riz. He had riz. Unfortunately, the following winter was so harsh that half of them moved back to New York, the other half moved into Olympia. Luckily for everybody in this room, Dr. Newell stayed. And when he became governor of the territory of Washington, one of his first orders of business was to ask the legislature to create a state medical board, or territorial medical board, which they did. And I found this brochure here. I don't know if you noticed that. Yeah, Washington is Pennsylvania of the West. I don't know what that means. I have no idea. I just thought it was funny. So in 1881, the legislature creates a board of medical examiners and the first Medical Practice Act. There was no exam. All you had to do was show that you graduated from medical school and you were in. Yeah, but you had to have a license to practice medicine. Anybody who's practicing before 1881 were grandfathered in. 1889, of course, Washington becomes a state. 75 citizens gather in Olympia to draft a constitution. The initial draft of the Constitution gave women the right to vote, and they prohibited the manufacture, possession, and sale of alcohol. Those two provisions didn't survive. About women's suffrage, twice the state legislature passed a law giving women the right to vote, and twice the state Supreme Court struck it down on technicalities. Back then, the liquor lobby was very strong, and they opposed women having the right to vote. They thought if women had the right to vote, they'd vote for prohibition. It's funny today, but they were right. Women got the right to vote, as you probably all know, in this state in 1910, 10 years before the 19th Amendment was passed. But this Constitution had a very interesting provision. Section 2 said the legislature shall enact laws to regulate the practice of medicine and surgery and the sale of drugs and medicines. I believe we're the only state in the union that has this provision creating a medical board. So when somebody asks you, you can say, we're in the Constitution. So 1 year later, the Washington State Medical Association wants to beef up regulation and keep out the charlatans. And so they asked the legislature to amend the Practice Act and have people take a written exam. So in 1890, the exam comes in. And this man, by the way, here is William Stewart Alstead. He was a giant in the field of surgery, early adopter of anesthetics. He experimented with cocaine and morphine as anesthesia on himself. Unfortunately, he got addicted to both. The focus of medical boards at this time was as gatekeepers. They wanted to keep bad people out of the profession. Diploma mills were rampant back then. But there was a disciplinary side, albeit a small one. So in 1890, this Practice Act had a disciplinary component, and they had a statute that defined unprofessional conduct. So we have our first definition of unprofessional conduct, and I'm going to show you what that definition is. But before I do that, I want to explain that our current definition has 29 subsections. So there's 29 different ways a physician can commit unprofessional conduct. Back then they had 8, only 8. I'm going to show them to you, and I want you to think about, does this section, is it still in our definition? So the first one, procuring, aiding, or abetting a criminal abortion. That was in our definition until just a few years ago when it was taken out, no longer there. Employing cappers or steerers. Capper or steerer back then was a person who was hired by a business to go out and get clients, drum up business. So back then, it was unprofessional conduct for a physician to hire someone to go out and round up patients. That's not in our law today, but there's a series of state and federal laws that cover parts of this, including our anti-rebating statute. Obtaining any fee of assurance on the assurance that a manifestly incurable disease can be permanently cured. We have something kind of similar to that now that we hardly ever use. The willful betrayal of a professional secret. Have that. Different language. Advertising in which untruthful or improbable statements are made. Subsection 2, as you probably know, is false advertising. That's still there. But this one, advertising medicines whereby the monthly periods of women can be regulated. That's still in our law? Shake your head. No. No. Thank goodness, right? Conviction of any offense involving moral turpitude. What they've done is kind of split this in two. Subsection 1 is acts of moral turpitude, dishonesty or corruption relating to the practice. You have a separate statute saying it's unprofessional conduct for a physician to get convicted of a gross misdemeanor or felony related to the profession. And finally, habitual intemperance. So we have current misuse of alcohol or drugs with a separate statute involving impairment. So you look at these, and many of these revolve around the same theme. And the theme is they want to stop people from, physicians from taking advantage of people, of deceiving them. That's the message that I take from this, that back in 1890, this was the big problem, physicians cheating people. So what I find interesting is what's not here. So today you handle two large categories of cases on professional conduct that are conspicuously absent. Guess what they are? Sexual misconduct and the biggest one of all. Thank you. Okay. So sexual misconduct is not here, and I have no idea why. And I've done a lot of research on this. I have no idea why. It's in the Hippocratic Oath. It's over 2,000 years old. It's not there. And I don't know why. I can tell you why negligence is not there. So a book I read explained that back then, medical boards around the country didn't think it was their business or their job to question the judgment of a physician in the practice of medicine. They said it's an inexact science. Physicians need wide latitude in deciding what's best for the patient. That was a philosophical reason. This definition was common among state medical boards. We were not unique at all. Sex of the patient, by the way, would not come along for decades. So let me back up, excuse me. So one of the first cases from the medical board that hit the Supreme Court is an illustration of kind of shenanigans that went on back then. So in 1903, a jury convicted Dr. James Stewart, a licensed physician, along with O.V. Lawson, an applicant, of conspiring to pay a current board member $600 for the questions for the upcoming exam. Jury convicted him. He appealed to the state Supreme Court. His defense was, we never actually paid the money. We never actually got the questions. Supreme Court said, you conspired, and so you're guilty. The medical board revoked his license. He appealed that to the state Supreme Court. They affirmed that as well. So I found in my research a number of references to people losing their licenses when the board found out that they had cheated on the exam. So lying and cheating was a big deal back then, and there was only one sanction, revocation. Okay, so how did they keep track of their licensees back then? Marissa, what do you think they did? What kind of database did they have? A big old book. I went to the state archives and I found several of these. So I took a picture of the oldest one. I know you've seen this before. But this is how they kept track of their licensees. They had a book, and the first entry there is from 1902. So they didn't have Helms. They had this. So I'll put MRSA on the spot. Which would you rather have? You don't have to answer that. But I imagine people would walk into the office back then and say, who's got the book? Where is it? Yeah. Okay, let's jump to 1909. So the Medical Association goes to the governor and complains. Hey, you're appointing too many irregulars to the board. So they convince the legislature to come up with a new practice act that specifies exactly who gets on the board. 5 from the regular profession, 2 from the homeopathic profession, 2 from the osteopathic profession. Then they add a definition to unprofessional conduct. Impersonating a physician is unprofessional conduct. And then they add a separate statute saying impersonating a board member and issuing a license is a crime. So think about that. Not only were licensed physicians impersonating other licensed physicians, but people were impersonating board members and issuing licenses for money. So it tells you what was really going on back then. So in the state archives, I found the minutes of the first meeting of this iteration of the board. And here they are. They did three things. So 9 people meet at a physician's house in Seattle. They do three things. They elect a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. They assign a topic to each member to draft questions for the exam, presumably within their field of expertise. And the third thing they did was they vote to pay themselves $10 a day for the time spent writing the exam questions. So what is $10 equal to today? $367. They get better compensated than you. And I can't leave this time period without talking about this woman. This is Linda Burfield Hazard. She opened up a sanitarium in Olalla, Washington, which is rural Kitsap County. And she treated patients with a very, you know her. Okay. Wow. You've heard the story. She's infamous. She wanted to remove toxins from patients' bodies. And so she had a 3-part regimen: starvation diet, people drank nothing but broth, pummeling, very vigorous massages. She pummeled people, and hours-long enemas. And that's what she did. And some people she held captive. So she was called the starvation doctor. Not officially, but people called her the starvation doctor. Dozens of her patients died. She targeted wealthy patients. She got them to change their wills. She took on 2 British heiresses and kept them captive. And one of them was able to smuggle a telegram to her nanny, her childhood nanny, who came over from England, paid a ransom to get those 2 out. Unfortunately, right after they got out, one of them died. And Hazard finally came to the attention of authorities. She was charged with first-degree murder. She was convicted of manslaughter. She claimed she was prosecuted because the regulars hated her. She had many devoted followers. At her sentencing, the judge got a lot of letters from people saying, "We love the treatment." I guess they liked the pummeling. I don't know. And he got a letter from 121 New Zealanders saying her treatment is a boon to suffering humanity, and to please let her get off. Well, she was sentenced to, I can't remember how many years she was sentenced to, but after 2 years of being in prison, the governor pardoned her on the condition that she moved to New Zealand. She moves, and she did. She moved to New Zealand, opened up a practice there, got in trouble for practicing without a license. She left New Zealand, came back to Washington, and what she did was she opened up a school of health. So she doesn't have a license, she opens up a school of health. Now we've seen that with a couple of our people, lose their licenses, go into some other type of practice. That's what she did. She wanted to prove that her 3-part regimen was effective. She did it on herself, did the starvation diet herself, and she died. Okay, let's talk about prohibition for just a couple minutes. So you probably all know that doctors have prescribed medicine, various ailments for thousands of years. 1917, the AMA, the American Medical Association, said enough. They issued a declaration stating there's no medicinal value to alcohol, none, and we support prohibition. Then 1920 comes along, prohibition is gaining strength, and the AMA reverses course and says, well, actually, alcohol does have medicinal value for 27 different conditions, including diabetes, cancer, snake bites, and old age. And so they convinced the federal government to create an exception, allowing doctors to prescribe alcohol for those conditions. And they do. They create that exception. The government said, and to show you a couple of ads here, government said, okay, you can prescribe alcohol, but you have to use a form. Here's the form. Name of the patient, address, the condition that they have, the type of alcohol, and the dosage. You probably think, that looks very similar to the medical cannabis form that we use today. So that form is not new. There it is. Wasn't cheap. The patients had to pay $3 to the doctor, another $3 to the pharmacist. And believe it or not, this might be shocking. This was a subject of much abuse. So let's talk about a case. Dr. Best. So this case illustrates why we have state medical boards and the limitations of state medical boards. All right. In 1919, a man by the name of Maximilian Leopold Herzig gets a license to practice medicine in Nevada. He got his diploma through a diploma mill. Through reciprocity, gets a license in Washington. And for the next 38 years, he travels around the state swindling people. Complaints came from all corners of the state. Patients complained, family members complained, county sheriffs complained, prosecutors complained, credit bureaus complained that he was providing unusual treatment, made unsubstantiated claims, demanded money up front, and then disappeared, wrote bad checks for medical equipment, and did all kinds of fraud. So I'll give you two complaints as examples of what he did. One man in Curlew, Washington, wrote to the board complaining about his treatment of his son. He said that he removed 3 tumors from his son's testicle in a hotel room with little or no anesthesia and injected him with what he called the elixir of the fountain of youth. It would cure the patient's rheumatism and make him feel 15 years younger. Well, it didn't. When the patient complained of excessive gas, Dr. Herzig recommended the injection of fresh cow's blood, both orally and rectally. The board's minutes that I found said that he needs to have his license revoked, but they couldn't find him. So apparently back then, to revoke a license, you had to find the person and take the license away. But he evaded detection for decades. A man in California reported that Herzig claimed to be able to treat cancer by withdrawing blood and then re-injecting it, saying he used the same treatment successfully on Pope Pius XI, General John Blackjack Pershing. Remember World War I? He was a hero of World War I. Dr. Herzig treated him in Pope Pius XI. In 1942, Herzig changes his name to Dr. Best and applies for a license to this board. He fails to show up for the interview, so they deny the license. He shows up in 1945 and he's granted a license under his new name. I have no idea why. The director of the Department of Licensing was upset about this. That was the umbrella agency this board was under, and wrote to the board and said, this man's a menace. And in 1957, the board set aside the case when they found out that Dr. Best had moved to California. He had taken his malfeasance there, and so the administrator for the board writes to the California board saying that he has committed almost every offense in the book. Later that year, we discovered that Dr. Best is not only practicing medicine in the state of California, he's also practicing law. So, 2 points here. One, this is why state medical boards exist. And when I talk to other people in other states, they all have a Dr. Best. They all have a guy who just ran amok and was hard to keep track of. Second thing, it shows that once somebody slips through, they get by the gatekeeping, very hard for them to stop. So a couple little tidbits, 2 epilogues. Dr. Best made a lot of crazy claims, treating popes and World War I generals and curing cancer. When World War II started, for us, after Pearl Harbor was bombed, Dr. Best sent a telegram to President Roosevelt offering his services, claiming that he served in the British Royal Navy in World War I. This particular claim got the attention of a state legislator who wrote to the British Royal Navy asking, did he really serve? And they responded. And here's the letter. I know it's pretty fuzzy, you can't read this, but here's a letter basically saying in a very, very polite tone, very British tone. He didn't serve. You can see it ends. So here's a contact for us to use in case somebody makes that claim. It's interesting that of all the stuff that happened, that stuck in somebody's craw, that particular claim. Okay. Today, in the Fremont neighborhood in Seattle, there's a monument to Dr. Bess of sorts. This building contains a coffee shop called Cafe Vita. You live there? You do? Okay. Corner of Fremont and 43rd North, or North, yeah. There is a coffee shop there called Cafe Vita. Next to it is a pizzeria called In Boca al Lupo. And according to Seattle Weekly, this was built at the direction of one Maximilian Herzig and his wife Frances in 1927. It's called, oops, I went the wrong way, called the Herzig Building. So people today are sitting in there enjoying their coffee and eating their pizza, and they have no idea what the namesake for that building did. In fact, I don't think many people outside this room know that. Okay, let's jump to 1955. A new state medical board. In 1955, the legislature was upset with the Board of Medical Examiners for not taking the disciplinary tasks seriously. So they responded by creating a new board, the Medical Disciplinary Board. So now we have two boards, Licensing Board and Disciplinary Board. And this is not unusual. This was actually a theme across the country. I found the minutes for this meeting. So the new board was 6 people, 6 members elected by district, and they had extra sanctions. Not only could they revoke, but they could suspend or reprimand the license. And these minutes are essentially a series of questions that the new board members had for their AAG advisor. So they asked him, what's the role of the AAG? How do we receive complaints and investigate them? What do we do about complaints against chiropractors or unlicensed people? Are the meetings open to the public? What about overcharging? What can we do about that? And the answers were all the same you get today. By the way, in the minutes for a meeting in 1959, the chair made the statement, overcharging for services is the biggest issue for the board today. Can you imagine? That was their biggest issue. Finally, they asked the AAG advisor, can you please define the term moral turpitude? So some issues never go away. And the AAG advisor said, I'll provide written guidance at a later time. We are still waiting for that memo. Tracy Baum. Back then, they were the same. Okay. Let's talk about the Kinchy principle. So this is a principle created in 1958 by our state Supreme Court. We still use it today. We don't call it that, but you still use it today. Dr. Kinchy was an obstetrician in Spokane. He was convicted of tax fraud, sentenced to 4 months at McNeil Island. The Medical Disciplinary Board charged him with being convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude. The first hearing for this board, this new board created in 55, was this case. And those are the panel members. Those are the Kinchy panel members. Look tough. Yeah. So Dr. Kinchy's defense was, yes, I was convicted of crime, but it didn't involve moral turpitude. My tax fraud didn't bear my ability to provide safe care to patients. And by the way, the AG prosecutor advisor, same person, was sympathetic to this argument. He recommended that this hearing panel reprimand Dr. Kinchy. They disagreed. They suspended his license for 8 months. He appeals and goes to the state Supreme Court. The Supreme Court issued a groundbreaking decision on what is moral turpitude and whether tax fraud involves moral turpitude. And so they said, despite what the statute said, discipline has 2 purposes. One, protect the public, and two, to protect the standing of the profession in the eyes of the public. They said the public has the right to expect the highest degree of trustworthiness of members of the medical profession, and it's a rational connection between tax fraud and one's trustworthiness or fitness to practice medicine. So 33 years later, in the Haley case, the Supreme Court addressed this issue again and expand upon it. Let's talk about Dr. Bamey. This case made national news. In the summer of 1965 in Port Orchard, Dr. Bamey and his wife and family members were working on the family boat. Fortunately, his wife got struck in the head with a wooden plank, and they took her to the hospital. A student nurse was in the room with Dr. Bamey's wife, Mrs. Bamey, and Dr. Bamey asked her to leave. He wanted to pray with his wife. She leaves. She comes back in to get something. She finds Dr. Bamey standing at the patient's hip and putting something in his pocket. She gets suspicious, goes and tells the head nurse. The head nurse comes in, Dr. Bamey's gone, checks the patient's hip, and there's a fresh injection site. She had been injected with a tranquilizer, and Dr. Bamey was charged with attempted murder. His wife lived. In fact, she not only lived, she stood by her man at the trial, despite the fact that the prosecutor introduced evidence that she was heavily insured. Dr. Bamey was having an affair with another woman, patient. Dr. Bamey is convicted, sentenced to 20 years in prison, and the board revokes his license. Now, this case I found dozens of articles. This was the talk of the town, Western Washington and nationally, for a number of reasons. One of which was that this was Dr. Bamey's third wife. In 1961, 4 years prior, he was charged with attempting to kill his second wife by injecting her with poison. He was acquitted. I found in the second epilogue to this case, and that wife, second wife, acquitted 3 months after the trial, she dies. Goes on to wife number 3. By the way, he was married to wife number 3 for the rest of his life. So an interesting epilogue is that I found in the board minutes a letter, a request to the board in 1969. And the request was from Dr. Carl Heffron, the physician at the state penitentiary in Walla Walla. His request to the board was, please transfer Dr. Bamey from Shelton to Walla Walla so that he can help me treat patients. And the board declined that request. They don't talk about whether they even had the authority. Can you imagine you demanding that one of your incarcerated licensees get transferred? Dr. Bamey was released from prison. The board reinstated his license in 1985 on the condition that he limit his setting to working at the Naval Hospital for the federal government. Okay. Let's move on to the 1970s. This was a decade where a lot of our current laws started to take shape, and I'll just hit a few of them. This is the first time incompetence comes in. A few years later, negligence comes in for the first time. Action in another state, gross overcharging. So remember, that was the big issue in 1959. Now it's part of your statute, gross overcharging. And then impairment. Summary suspension is now available. You can order evaluation, pay increase from 25 to 50 a day, and the Department of Licensing chooses an executive director. And that last point may seem trivial. It's not. It became a big issue later. So, notable firsts. When I did my research, I wondered who was the first public member on these two boards. I couldn't find any announcement, official announcement of that, but I had the board rosters. So I surmised that Nancy Skinner Nordhoff was the first public member for the Board of Medical Examiners. Nancy had a very interesting life, which I really can't get into, but she just died in January. She, by the way, built a Tibetan Buddhist temple on Whidbey Island. Marion Reed was the first public member and the first woman on the disciplinary board. She was appointed in 1978 by Governor Dixie Lee Ray, her sister. So Marion Reed, when Governor Ray was elected, she was unmarried. So she had nobody to take over the duties of First Lady, which included being the official hostess for the mansion. So she appointed her sister Marion. She was the official hostess. And then a year later, appoints her to the board. So I look at the board roster back then, they list the members of the board and their addresses. Marion Reed's address is the Executive Mansion, Olympia, Washington. So can you imagine not only having an ex-governor on your board, but having a sister of governor sitting on. 1980s, Mount St. Helens explodes, and so do the problems between the commission and or the boards rather, their umbrella agencies. So this was a decade of uniformity and of conflict. The legislature was bothered by the fact that all the boards and professions had their own practice act, their own way of doing discipline. They said you ought to do it all the same. So they passed what we call the Uniform Disciplinary Act. So all of our disciplining procedures were taken out of our act, and we had to follow what we call now the UDA. This was the first time sexual misconduct was officially made part of unprofessional conduct. When I talked to people back then, I talked to people who worked back then, I said, when a physician had sex with a patient, what did you do? Charged him with moral turpitude. And I remember a lunch and learn a while back where we invited the person who was the chair of the board in the 70s, named Robbie Robertson. He was a giant in the field of pediatrics in our state. He brought the Mr. Yuck stickers to the state of Washington. I remember one story when he was talking about life in the 70s. One story he told. He said, this is how we handled some sex cases. Got the complaint. As a chair, he picked up the phone. Hey, Dr. So-and-so, how you doing? We got a complaint that you're having a relationship with this patient. Can you knock it off? Can you end it? Great, thank you. Say hi to the wife and kids. Bye. That's efficient. Not very transparent. Okay, so the 80s were also the time of the Troubles. This was a turbulent time. It began with a concern that the Department of Licensing was using physician licensing fees for other programs, such as real estate, timeshares. So in 1982, 1984, the executive director for the boards went to her supervisors in DOL and said, we have surplus funds in our account. Can I tell the boards? They said, no, can't tell them. Well, she did. The WSMA annual meeting, she tells the chair gives a report, people at the meeting, and all hell breaks loose. The director says that conduct is intolerable, fires her. She's out. Because of the concern about fees, WSMA starts pushing to get the licensing board, disciplinary board, out of the Department of Licensing. And this debate is reflected in many, many meeting minutes. In '88, the Department of Licensing director fires another executive director, out. Those board members are mad. They go to the governor, talk to the governor. The director of the Department of Licensing hears from the governor, and she resigns under pressure. An article in the Seattle Times about this that I found that listed a number of concerns that the governor had with the director, but the article also mentions that the board members were very upset with this director. Board of Medical Examiners was so frustrated over this. The chair went to the governor and said, during my tenure, I've had 5 EDs. In less than a decade, 5. Board of Medical Examiners got so frustrated with either the misuse of licensing fees or inability to get information on how they're spent. They held a press conference on July 12, 1988, and they stated they were putting a moratorium processing license applications, and they were refusing to meet. Oops. They went on strike. The Board of Medical Examiners went on strike. They went to the disciplinary board. join us in the strike. Medical Disciplinary Board said, no, we're going to work with WSMA and the legislature and the governor on a legislative solution. So they went to the governor, and the governor said, we can find a solution. They talked about staffing, budget, and resources, and WSMA formed a task force. And the people, staff for the two boards, remember, they come in each day wondering, am I going to have a new ED? And all this trouble. You can imagine what that pressure was on staff. They had T-shirts made. It says medical. I talked to a person that worked back then. She gave me this. So here's a shirt. We don't need shirts today. So how did this all resolve? 1989, the Berlin Wall came down and the Department of Health was created. There are a lot of official statements as to why the state of Washington needed a Department of Health, focusing on people's health. But I'm told one of the big drivers was the two boards' dissatisfaction with DOL. In fact, one person said, that's why DOH exists. I can't confirm that. No way to confirm that. When DOH came in, they proposed taking all the investigators and all the attorneys and putting them in one pool so they could serve all the boards and commissions, or all the boards at that time, and programs. WSMA said, oh no, if you do that, we want dedicated attorneys and investigators so we know where the licensing fees are spent. So 1991, three big things happened in 1991. First, the Medical Disciplinary Board elected their first public member as chair, also the first woman, Marilyn Ward. She was a dynamo community activist, served on many boards. She was wonderful. We also got our first PA, Jen Paxton. I'm still in touch with. She's in Ellensburg. PAs were first licensed in our state in 1971. Took 20 years for the legislature to create a seat on the board of PA. First statute creating the seat said the PA can vote only on PA cases. That was WSMA's insistence. It was 2 more years before they got PA suffrage. Jan, when the board voted on an MD case, which is most of the cases, they'd vote, she'd sit there like this, look down and shake her head, expressing her disapproval for not being able to vote. And the third thing that happened in 1991, momentous thing that happened, I started. Same forehead. I know what you're wondering. You're wondering, is that you on your first day? Yes, it was. I came in the Department of Health office full of youthful energy and boyish enthusiasm, big smile on my face. And that orientation the first morning was so rigorous that after lunch, I had to take a nap. Okay, Haley case. We are, time is it? Okay, I'm going to shorten this part. Haley case, great facts. It's really important to read, but I'll just tell you quickly. A 16-year-old girl gets in a car accident, ruptures her spleen, has emergency surgery, and has her spleen removed by Dr. Haley. They didn't know each other before this, no relationship. And she returns to his office for 2 follow-ups. He looks at her scar. At the second follow-up, he says to her, you don't need to see me anymore. If you're concerned about your scar, see a plastic surgeon. They're done. Well, 3 months later, he comes back unannounced to his office because she wants to see the physician who removed her spleen. She comes back a second time. Second time she comes back in his office, he has a bottle of wine. They have a glass of wine, and he kisses her on the cheek. Then they start a sexual relationship. I'll give you the ages again, 16 and 66. Her parents find out there's trouble at home. She drops out of school, runs away from home. He puts her up at his beach cabin. with a liquor cabinet, and she testified at the hearing, all we did was drink and have sex. So the board said there's two problems with this. This is sex with a patient, and it's acts of moral turpitude relating to the profession. Board's logic was, even though the physician-patient relationship had ended, it was so close in time, he had sex with the patient. And of course, these are acts of moral turpitude. Dr. Haley's argument, he appealed to the state Supreme Court. He made two arguments. He was not a patient at the time we had sex, and it may have been acts of moral turpitude, but it didn't relate to the profession. My relationship with the patient had no bearing on my skills as a surgeon. The Supreme Court said, you're right, this is not sex with a patient because the statute says sex with a patient. That's not sex with a former patient. They did explain that the physician-patient relationship was so limited in scope that she was really an ex-patient. But if Dr. Haley had been in a different specialty that had an ongoing relationship with a patient, such as family medicine or oncology or OBGYN, they would have ruled differently. But they said this moral turpitude, acts of moral turpitude did relate to the profession using the Kinchy principle because it lowers the standing of the profession in the eyes of the public. Oh, and what were the sanctions that the board imposed? 10 years probation. And I'm sorry, Dr. Haley, but you have to practice in Waynesboro, Mississippi. I know that sounds bizarre, and people don't believe me, but I can send you the order. That's what it says. That's tough, right? I don't know. I've never been to Waynesboro. I have been to Mississippi. I liked it there. But I have a clue as to why they did that. He was also under the care. He had to continue his care with a psychiatrist there in Mississippi. So he had to be, I'm guessing, during the hearing, that's where he was living. So he said, stay there, and if you move, tell us. Finally, Dr. Haley is the son of the founder, one of the founders of the Brown and Haley Company. Their famous product is almond roca. Okay, 1994. Nelson Mandela is elected president of South Africa. And the legislature says, we don't need two boards. Let's just make one board, combine them, and we'll give it a name, Medical Quality Assurance Commission. Remember when this happened? They took 6 members of one board, 13 members of the other one, put them together, 19 members, one of the largest boards in the country. Legislatures later added 2 more public members to make 21. They increased the pay from $50 to $250 a day. It was a big deal back then. And this was important because one case where the medical disciplinary board suspended a doctor's license, or medical examiners renewed the license, didn't have very good communication, and he was in the newspaper holding that license up, saying, I got my license. Very embarrassing, but it happened. What can't happen today? Years ago. But confirm that. Okay, quickly about these 3 cases. Dr. McGuire, no really real precedent here, but interesting. Dr. McGuire was a psychiatrist in Alaska who had a 5-year sexual relationship with a female patient who had claimed she had 36 different personalities. She moved to Washington. He coincidentally moved to Washington, went to work at McNeil Island while he was battling with the Alaska State Medical Board. They ended up revoking his license. We had I was working on that case, presented an agreed order. We had statements from McNeil Island saying, we love him, we need him, let him treat males in the prison system. That's what the agreed order said. The patient contacted media, Cairo TV came with television cameras at the presentation of an agreed order. You had cameras there, you had a room full of people, supporters. The panel rejected the settlement, went to hearing. We had the people testify. They ended up allowing him to practice at McNeil Island. This made the patient very upset. She and her friends came to a next commission meeting when Dr. McGuire made his personal appearance with signs about sex offenders, how bad the commission was, picketing at the Tacoma Sheraton. The hotel employees came and told him, you can't picket, but they came in the room. Here's the real and there might have been 10 or 15 of them. And Dr. McGuire appeared every January for the next 10 years, and they came every single time wearing these shirts, very persistent. And they gave me one. They gave me a shirt. Dr. Gary Saul was a psychologist, and back then the statute said you can order somebody into an evaluation, and they have to go, and if they don't go, you can suspend the license. The psychology board suspended Dr. Saul's license when he refused to go. He sued, and the Superior Court judge said the statute is unconstitutional, and you have to have some kind of process for them to challenge. We have that, and we went to the legislature. That's why 170 lists that process out. We can challenge because of Dr. Saul. Dr. Wynn was a case before the board. He was accused of having sex with patients. He was found to have done that, and he went to the Supreme Court saying the standard of proof is wrong. It shouldn't be preponderance of the evidence. It should be clear and convincing evidence. And the state Supreme Court agreed. So that's why we have clear and convincing as the standard, not by statute, but by Supreme Court decision. Okay, a few words about the pilot project. There were a number of bills that came through the legislature proposed by WSMA and other people to take authority away from the commission. Various ways. None of them passed. I didn't pay too much attention to them. Until 2007, there was a bill to take away your authority and have the secretary be the disciplining authority. You would still exist. You just give advice, you'd be advisory to the secretary. We ignored that too until it passed the House committee, passed the House floor. And that's when we got really excited. And with the help of WSMA, the bill got killed, came back in 2008. Same form. And through a lot of work by different people, the bill changed to give us a pilot project, give us authority over spending, over our staffing, executive director, number of things. So what happened before this was the Department of Health had a reorganization, took away the attorneys and investigators from the commission, put them in a big pool like they proposed in 1989, and we served various boards. So you might call me and say, Mike, how's that case going? Sometimes I had to say, I'm sorry, Dr. Murphy, I'm working on a podiatry case that has priority. That didn't sit well with our board members. Same for the investigators. So that was one of the reasons for the pilot project. We are allowed to designate our own investigators, staff attorneys, et cetera, licensing people, have them work for us for 5 years and be able to choose our own executive director. And we worked very hard for those 5 years, and we were successful. This is a really big day back in April of 2013 when Jay Inslee signed the bill making the pilot project, or the status that we have permanent. Right above, and she was the chair. Behind her, you can barely see him, Dr. Richard Brantner. He became the chair. You can see a young Micah Matthews up there. Purple shirt. That's Micah Matthews, is not here. And there I am with the green tie. This was a good day. This is why you have the structure you have now. I don't take this for granted because I've been on the other side. Okay, that kind of, and a lot has happened since then with this new structure. I'm kind of jumping from 2013 to 2026. We've made a number of great improvements. I think all go back to this work that was done to get us the structure that we have today. And here's our mission statement. We promote patient safety and enhance the integrity of the profession for licensing, discipline, rulemaking, and education. Notice the highlighted portion, enhancing the integrity of the profession. That's the Kinsey principle. There it is. We put it in our mission statement sometime during the pilot project. So that concludes the 145-year journey of the medical profession. I hope you found that interesting and useful too. I think it explains how we got here, and that helps us understand who we are. Thank you.